We all carry parts of ourselves that we deem too dark, too unacceptable, too shameful to let into the light. But what if embracing these parts was the key to becoming whole? Today we're diving into the transformational work of shadow integration. You're listening to or watching the Sedona Soul Sisters Show, where we share psychic guidance and healing for embodied spiritual awakening. I'm Christel, and I'm on a mission to support spiritual practitioners to access intuition, unlock your psychic gifts, and live your purpose. A big thank you to all our listeners all over the world, and a special shout out to our listeners in Kensington in the UK. You can schedule sessions in West Sedona or virtual sessions for psychic readings, soul contract sessions, Reiki, yoga, meditation, mediumship, angel readings, starseed readings, and more at SedonaSoulSisters.com. It's time to repair the healing web on planet Earth. Shadow work refers to the process of acknowledging, accepting, and integrating aspects of ourselves that we would rather keep hidden and often unconscious. It's the parts of ourselves that we have suppressed, disowned, rejected, repressed, and deemed unacceptable. These shadows contain qualities, emotions, beliefs, desires, and traits that exist within our psyche that we have consciously or unconsciously disowned. There is also our personal shadow, and then our collective shadow. Some key aspects of shadow work include bringing unconscious material into our conscious awareness, shining a light on parts of ourselves that we have kept hidden, often from ourselves. Shadow work requires radical self-honesty, having the courage to face our insecurities, flaws, our darker impulses, often our trauma, and our undesirable traits without judgment. Embracing our totality, understanding that light and dark, positive and negative, exist within us all as part of being human. The key with shadow work is integration and not elimination. The goal is not to get rid of our shadows, but to compassionately welcome and re-own these aspects of ourselves to create wholeness. This is a practice of self-acceptance. By owning all parts of ourselves, the light and the dark, we can develop greater authenticity and self-acceptance, reclaiming lost power and energy. This, to me, is one of the biggest reasons to do shadow work. Our disowned shadows often contain immense power that has been blocked, repressed, shut down, and disowned. And that vitality, that creative life force energy can be reclaimed. Shadow work includes a variety of things depending upon the practitioner that you work with. It can include self-inquiry, breath work, role play, journaling, dream work, creating art, spoken word, dance, and other practices that are designed to bring what is unconscious or subconscious into a place of greater awareness, to be witnessed, to be worked with, to learn the lessons from these shadow aspects of ourselves. Shadow work has roots in many traditions all over the world, and Carl Jung, a Swiss psychotherapist, was the one who popularized shadow work and made great advances of integrating shadow work into the well-respected field of psychotherapy, which has become a big part of the personal development and coaching worlds. Carl Jung believed there were three parts of the psyche: the ego, the conscious mind, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious, the deeply embedded patterns and archetypes shared across cultures. Within the personal unconscious, Jung identified the shadow, the repressed, denied, or unacknowledged aspects of ourselves that we tend to reject or ignore. These are often traits, emotions, or impulses that conflict with our conscious ego or self-image. Jung believed that for psychological integration and wholeness, we must confront and assimilate our shadow selves rather than repressing them. Repressing the shadow leads to psychological imbalance and projection of our shadows onto others. A key point being, if it is not integrated, we will project our shadows onto others. The process of acknowledging, exploring, and integrating these shadow elements became known as shadow work within Jungian psychology and psychoanalysis. An important aspect to mention at this point is my perspective on shadow work is about making the unconscious conscious and tapping into the power that gets distorted when we try to pretend certain aspects of ourselves or the dominant culture don't exist, that then it comes out as dysfunction, manipulation, it can come out as abuse. So from my perspective, working with shadow material within ourselves and with the collective taps us in to the raw creative power of the shadow. While some people would say that the shadow is bad, I practice in a tradition that recognizes the duality of life on earth. And while I believe we are all one consciousness, on earth we are going to experience love and loss and sickness and health and death and birth. We are all going to experience a huge spectrum of life, of challenges, of great things, of terrible things. And that's part of the reality of it. And bypassing either end of the spectrum, meaning not expanding our capacity to experience goodness, bliss, heaven on earth, all of these things. We want to expand our capacity to enjoy and celebrate those aspects of bliss and be willing to be in the challenges and not run from them or avoid them, but to tap into the creative power of the full experience. I've talked about this in many episodes in a variety of different ways, looking at the different flavors, colors, textures that light and shadow give to us. For example, you can't be like, well, shadow is bad. It is the reality. Like when the sun comes out or the light that is shining off of my computer, it puts a shadow behind me. And so if I didn't want to have a shadow, then I couldn't turn on the light. The reality is, where there is light, there will always be a shadow. And the same is true in our own consciousness. And it's better to be able to tap into the creative power of our greatest fears. Doing these shadow work practices is an invitation into a deep space of vulnerability, compassion, recognizing our own unhealthy patterns with ourselves and with others, yet approaching it as an opportunity to heal. The way that I see it is like, if there's an infection, you don't just want to slap some cream on it and put a Band-Aid on it and hope it heals. At first, you want to clean the wound out. And that's going to be a process of like cleaning out the wounds, the energetic, emotional wounds inside of our own psyche. There is the way of cleaning things out, getting the toxicity out, and then doing the repair work. An important thing I want to note, I would not recommend starting shadow work if someone is in what I would call the pit of despair, or self-attack is a core strategy of when you're not feeling good, right? If you haven't learned to recognize self-attack, which can become self-abuse, shadow work can do more harm than good. So a core part of the work that I do in personal power with ourselves and with other people is what I call VPR. It is more commonly known as the trauma triangle, sometimes called the drama triangle, because it is also used in storytelling. Different people use different names, but the names that I use, there's 3 positions on the triangle: victim, perpetrator, and rescuer. And if you are operating in this triangle in life or in storytelling, this is a very simplified version of these teachings, yet most people are familiar enough, can get it quickly. In recognizing VPR within ourselves, recognizing the ways that we are the perpetrator to ourselves with negative self-talk, with self-attack, with perhaps self-abuse, that is really can make shadow work high risk. Learning to be able to hold anything you discover in shadow work with deep compassion for yourself as a human is essential. If you have a habit of self-attack or verbal self-abuse, be really careful in exploring shadow work and ideally work with a skilled practitioner so that if you slip into this downward spiral, they can help neutralize the spiral and help you come out of it. Because for me, of course, the point of shadow work is to tap into the repressed power that resides and to also be able to recognize in ourselves and in our relationship with others, the places and the ways that we play those core roles. So many spiritual practitioners and healers and clients that I work with, including myself, in my upbringing, I was raised in a codependent household. My go-to strategy was to be the rescuer, was to try to make sure everybody was okay, to take care of everybody else, to not pay attention to my own needs, but to manage everybody else's needs. So for me, the rescuer was the easiest place for me to go. It can also seem like a good thing. It's like, but I'm just helping them. Yet, if we are reinforcing dysfunctional power dynamics, enabling dysfunctional patterns, it's not ultimately helpful. And I think that recognizing this VPR pattern, this trauma triangle in ourselves can be incredibly helpful in going into and exploring shadow work. Because most of the shadow aspects of ourselves are going to be one of those roles, the victim, the perpetrator, or the rescuer. So in going into them is getting in touch with the essence of which role is this aspect of my shadow. For example, I was working with a client today around guilt and shame. In his situation was connected into being the victim, being in a place of being powerless. So the victim has less power. The perpetrator has power over. The rescuer also has power over, yet learning to distinguish how to help somebody without being the rescuer is more complex than what we're going to go to here. Doing an episode on the trauma triangle is definitely on my list of podcasts to do. So if you are interested in hearing the trauma triangle episode sooner than later, definitely be sure to comment wherever you're seeing this podcast or send me an email and let me know what your questions are. Back to shadow work. Having this foundation of recognizing the trauma triangle in the exploration of shadow work is incredibly helpful. Without doing that, without knowing the ways in which I am the perpetrator to myself, shadow work can cause more harm than good. Yet if I know the ways that I am intense with myself or hard on myself or impatient with myself, I can more easily navigate them in the context of shadow work. And also looking at the trauma triangle, looking at how the trauma triangle is playing out in our relationships is a practice of shadow work from my perspective, because most often we don't want to see those things about ourselves. I do recommend starting shadow work first as a personal practice and looking at the relationships within yourself before you start evaluating how you can work with the shadow aspects of personal relationships, because it involves another person, can be higher risk, take greater skill. The easiest place to start is with your own self-talk. And the slippery part of changing your self-talk is being mean to yourself for being mean to yourself, right? I said something mean to myself. Why am I such an idiot? Why do I keep doing that? Why can't I fix it? Instead of, if I said something mean to myself, being like, oh, I'm sorry, Christel. I'm sorry I said that thing to you again. I want to do better. It's going to take me time, but I really am focused on changing this pattern of saying mean things to you. The key with changing self-talk is to recognize it and neutralize it immediately, and to not create the downward spiral, to then beat myself up and be mean to myself for being mean to myself. And then I'm hard on myself, and then I'm saying meaner things to myself, and then it's getting worse. And then I'm going down the spiral into an even worse place, rather than recognizing the pattern I have of saying mean things to myself, neutralizing it immediately, apologizing, and saying I want to do better. The key, which I recommend this in your relationship with other humans as well, is don't say, I will never do that again. Because if it's a pattern that you've been doing for decades, you probably will do it again. Not on purpose, but because it takes time to change patterns. I want to do better, because that can be true, unless it isn't, in which case you wouldn't even be listening to this, so never mind. So I want to share a story with you, because for me, this was one of the most powerful moments that came from a really intense experience. So I was at an in-person shadow work workshop. The setup was, there were times where you could role play with one other person, and there were certain parameters that were set for which the role play could happen. If something went super sideways, a facilitator could step in to manage the situation. There was a framework with which this was happening. I stepped in to a role play session with a man that he and I had had a personal conflict outside of the class setting, and neither of us were feeling good about each other. We stepped into this opportunity to play with embodied shadow work. So this is not always included in shadow work. A lot of shadow work is personal work that you're working with your own shadow. So this particular community that I was working with, it was working with other people, which is a whole other thing that isn't super common, but it does exist out there. Anyway, back to the story. So I step into this session. There's a charge between him and I. There's conflict. We start interacting with each other quickly. He is standing inches from my face, screaming at me. And keep in mind that I can pull the plug on this at any time, right? There is a facilitator. There are boundaries and rules. And so I was a willing participant in this. And he was saying terrible things to me. He was calling me names that I can't say on the podcast because I'm not allowed to swear. But he was calling me names and swearing in my face. And the way that the things that he was saying to me, the things that I can say to you here, he's like, nobody likes you. Nobody wants to be your friend. Like, he was saying these things that I desperately did not want to be true. Yet there was a part of me that was afraid they were. So as he was saying these things and shouting in my face, it felt like energetically, it was like, I felt like I was being punched. It was like, it was awful. It felt terrible. I was energetically, mentally trying to block myself. And then at a certain point, within a short amount of time, it was like a switch flipped inside of me. What I would call the fierce feminine in me just started receiving the pure power of what he was saying, rather than listening to the words and taking on the story and fighting, no, these things can't be true, even though part of me feared they were. It was like when this switch flipped, it was like the pure, all of this energy was pouring into me by shouting at me, by saying these things. When I was able to just feel the energetics, it was this enormous rush of power like I had never felt before. And so then I switched from like trying to defend myself and fight against what he was saying, is then I started repeating exactly what he was saying. Nobody likes you. Nobody likes me. And it was theatrical and dramatic and incredibly powerful. It literally was a life-changing experience for me, where the things that he was saying to me, I was taking them on as truth. I was fighting against what he was saying, hoping they weren't true. But then when that switch flipped in me, and all of the sudden it was pure power, and I embraced the power of the things that he was saying, and I was repeating them at the top of my voice, like the names that he was calling me. I was saying, I am a blank. I am. And literally, if somebody was watching and didn't know what was happening, it was intense. It probably looked pretty cuckoo, I would have to say. Yet, for me, it was life-changing because as somebody who cares deeply about making a positive impact in the world, healing work is literally the center of my life. That thinking, believing, taking on the truth of the things that he was saying to me was hurting me. Yet when I was able to tap into the raw power of them and to just move the energy, and part of it was using my voice, was screaming back at him and saying, I am a blank. It was the pure power of creative energy. And I've talked about creative energy and life force in so many episodes, but this is an example of where shadow material, where something I don't want to be true, where in the moment I just embrace the pure power of it and let it run through my body and stop trying to push it away, stop trying to make it not true, to just embrace the pure power of it in that moment, literally changed my life. This, what I would call embodied partner shadow integration, is not for everyone. If you are going to explore it, I definitely recommend that you work with a professional that is facilitating, especially if you're working with it between you and a partner. It can be incredibly powerful, yet it's dangerous. Let's just call it what it is. It is high risk. In this situation that I'm talking about, this man that I had this interaction with, he was just somebody that I had known from the community. It wasn't my partner. It wasn't my best friend. It wasn't my brother. If this relationship completely ends after this interaction, which it probably was over before this interaction, that wasn't a massive loss. If this was like, let's say that was my partner, saying those kind of terrible things can get tattooed in somebody's consciousness that it isn't so easy to let go of. For me, because it was somebody who wasn't that close to me, they hadn't been in my life for very long, and I had pretty much been like, not so interested in being friends with you. So it was low risk in that way. It wasn't a big loss for the relationship to end, and to play with that high risk activity of embodied shadow work, of screaming in each other's faces. When I went into this, just like receiving the pure power, I mean, I literally sounded like a crazy woman, right? I was laughing in his face. I was screaming things back at him that he was saying to me. And it was fascinating to watch his reaction, because when he was saying the things and it was like, oh, it was like I was trying to defend myself. When that switch flipped and I started channeling the energy through my body, it was like his eyes got big and his energy totally changed. It was a fascinating experience. I will say, after that whole practice session was complete. I did thank him because after I had time to integrate that a few days later, I sent him a message and was like, that was incredibly powerful for me. Thank you so much for being willing to play on that level, because it is a high risk activity. Not everyone could do that kind of a thing. And for me, it was so deeply transformational because it touched on these core fears of things I don't want to be true about me. I still don't want people to not like me, but at the same time, I know people don't. I'm more okay with it now. This is a rather intense experience and exploration of shadow work, but I want to share it with you because it was life-changing, of being able to recognize life force energy, recognizing we all know that words have incredible power to create and destroy, right? You could say something to someone and destroy them, hurt them deeply. You can also lift somebody up. We know this about the power of words. For me, that visceral experience of shifting from the meaning of the words in my mind doing something negative to me, to being able to switch into the energy and not take on any of the story that he was saying. Because in that interaction, he was trying to hurt my feelings, right? That was part of the practice. How do you hit somebody's triggers in order to discharge them? Because there's a way in which if we don't practice being able to get our system activated by energy, by somebody saying something, and then be able to practice doing something else. That was one of those moments. And this was before social media was what it is now with cancel culture, how awful people can be to each other on social media. It was a way for me to be like, somebody else's perspective of me is none of my business. And the more that I try to defend myself against somebody else's feeling of me or somebody else's story about me is a waste of energy. Instead of just being like, they're giving me energy. Can I just receive the energy and carry on with what I'm doing, utilizing that creative power they've just offered? It's not super easy, but it does help to practice. I shared about the role play session. For me, it was very intense, yet it totally changed my relationship to what other people think about me. It gave me an enormous amount of freedom of not caring what everybody thinks, not needing everyone to like me. I do want to be a good person. I do want to create healing in the world, and not everyone is going to like me. I am not going to support everyone. And part of it is acceptance of that, rather than the codependency of who do I need to be for you to like me. So for me, that experience was an incredible, radical experience, intense experience that gave me an enormous amount of emotional, mental, and energetic freedom. I'd like to share another personal experience of mirror shadow work that I do with myself and recommend to my clients. One level of mirror shadow work is looking in your own eyes in a private place where you can spend some time and taking deep breaths and naming challenging emotions. For example, me looking into my own eyes and saying, I see your grief. I see your pain. And going more slowly than I'm going now. And it can be helpful to say the words a few times. I see your grief. And see what happens to my face. I mean, you may see my face changing as I am using the camera as my mirror. Although I can't see myself in that moment, the second time I said, I see your grief, I felt my face change. And the more times I say that one word and give myself time to feel it, and also be in the willingness to look in my own eyes, for me, I am very comfortable with eye contact, and I've been doing shadow work for many years. So this practice for me can quickly become a practice that brings incredible relief to my system, to where I don't have to run from my grief or my pain or try to hide it, that it's just, I am there with myself. I see your grief, pain, fear, hate. You can definitely do things that are more intense. Because even saying, I see your grief is not easy, right? If shadow work and mirror work is new to you, start with the shallow end rather than diving into your greatest fears of the scene that I was talking about earlier, where this man was saying, everybody hates you, nobody likes you. If I said that into my own eyes, that's like a level 10 instead of saying, I see your grief. For me is like a 1 in the charge. Like there's very little grief. Like me saying that, if I was truly looking in my own eyes right now and saying, I see your grief, I feel relief instantly. Like it isn't a charge. If I looked in my eyes right now and said, everyone hates you, nobody likes you, that's like a 6. Yet you can play with these different things of saying the words. Sometimes people need words to help them go in to touch on the shadow. Also, just eye gazing, looking at your own eyes in the mirror, often the negative self-talk will come to the surface, which is incredibly helpful to know the things you say to yourself. In that situation, it can be helpful to turn on record on your phone, look in your own eyes, and then record the things that your mind thinks about you, which that is the inner perpetrator. In this practice, when you're looking at it, as we talked about the victim and the perpetrator, in this case, where you're looking at negative self-talk, you're both. You really can be all three, right? You're the perpetrator, the one saying the mean things. You're also the victim because you're the one that's receiving the negative things. And then there can be a part of you that swoops in to be like, that's not nice. So knowing that all three roles are inside of each of us and seeing what things activate these shadow aspects. And the more we bring them into consciousness, the more power we have to shift our experience, to change our life. The mirror practice, naming I see, challenging emotion, repeating the negative self-talk out loud. If you are going to do that, I would do it for a very short amount of time, like 30 seconds or less, and then bring the antidote, right? Then be like, okay, that's enough. Because depending upon your own experience, that can be a whole downward spiral of disaster, bringing you into a deep, dark place, which is not the point of shadow work. Sometimes it is going to excavate things and it's going to get the toxic stuff out. You have to bring it out of the system to be able to clean it up. But it isn't just a practice of going deeper and deeper into unhealthy patterns of self-talk. If you are going to explore the negative self-talk and saying the things out loud, limit the amount of time, and then breathe, shake it off, clear your energy, and say, I'm sorry. I said those things about you. I'm sorry. I regularly say those things about you. I want to be better at supporting you. I want to love you. Or if it's true, I do love you. I'm sorry I say mean things to you. Because then you shift into both acknowledging the mean things you say to yourself and also acknowledging, I don't want to talk to anybody that way. I'm sorry I talked to you that way. So it is doing the repair work that you would do with a human being, changing negative self-talk patterns. To me, the key to it, which negative self-talk is a shadow work practice, to name it and to repair it. Repairing those negative self-talk patterns, it's like repairing any relationship, is to acknowledge repairing those negative self-talk patterns is repair work, like it would be in a relationship with another person. To say, I'm sorry I said mean things to you. I really want to be supportive. Please forgive me. I will do better next time. And that part is really important. Thank you for being a part of our community. I am honored to support your embodied spiritual awakening. Are you ready for a personalized rites of passage with me? The Embodied Soul Purpose series focuses on integrating parts of you that were lost along the way in a soul retrieval process and an activation of the 7 main chakras or energy centers. Embracing all aspects of you and your past, no matter what happened, so you can create the best chapter of your life, no matter what your current age. You can book your series at sedonasoulsisters.com/soul. Please leave a review and follow on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, breathe gently, listen to your guidance, and create miracles.